We're getting back on track here with Kathryn and Emily, but as you know, we won't stay there for long because this is the Going Off Track podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I'm Kathryn, that's Emily, and that was not the 2024 season that I think anyone expected, but I think it was awesome. Like, it was what we deserved.
Exactly. I don't know what the saying is. It's like, it's not what we wanted, it's what we deserved, or however it goes. But when we started 2024, like News Britain, pre-2024, Lewis Hamilton's contract breaking in February, I never would have expected what happened to be 2024 season. Like, we came off of 2023, where it was a shock that Carlos won Singapore because Red Bull had been winning everything. Max was on a streak. Like, he was the only one to win a race outside of Red Bull, and it was insane. And I think we all just thought it would be carried through to this season as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that you said was, credit to what Max and Red Bull had done in 2023, which got all the other teams in gear for 2024 to make F1 more competitive and to bring us what was technically a 3-horse race for the championship that was really just a 2-horse race because Checo'd. We'll get to that in a second. But it really is... It was good that Max was dominant for the fact that it woke everyone up and they're like, okay, we need to do something to try and stop him without, breaking his physical kneecaps.
Exactly. And I think I mentioned that in I don't remember what we did, but we did from the DMs on is Max ruining F1? And I'm pretty sure I said exactly what you were saying is he's only making it better. Yes, this season might seem slow for everyone because he's winning everything, but it's going to push everybody to do better. And I don't want to take away from the engineers and, people on the teams in 2023 saying they weren't doing their job or they weren't trying, because they were. But I think it really pushed them to their 120% of getting creative and trying, not changing aerodynamics, but getting super creative and pushing themselves to go the distance and go even further than they probably would have expected their car to. And I do attribute all of that to Max and Red Bull from 2023.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I really think that this is going to take us into, and we'll talk about some very early 2025 season predictions, because this is obviously the podcast that only talks about the future. But this is only going to benefit the sport.
We were just talking about the past. Now we're going to talk about 2025. But this is our 2024 full season recap, and we're still
talking about the future.
Talk about other seasons.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's only going to benefit the sport and it's going to only be even more competitive come
for sure
2025, come 3 months from now, and it feels like forever, and it also feels like not soon, way too soon.
Right, and I think it's really important to highlight, not to jump ahead of ourselves, but it's really important to highlight Red Bull did not come in first or second; they came in third. Mm-hmm. So yes, Max won the drivers' championship, but that was due to his dominance, I would say, in the first first half of the season. And then the second half of the season, every other constructor came around and they really, cranked it up. McLaren went on a tear. Ferrari got those sneaky wins and sneaky podiums to, add up the points and come in second for constructors. And I don't know if Red Bull kind of took a back seat because of where they were. They were so far out in front, the first several races. Not to say, again, their engineers and their team just kind of sat back and did nothing. But I don't know if they really kept pushing the car as much as they should have or could have.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Because you brought that up, remember who was a little crash happy for Red Bull the first half of the season?
That's true.
Which and we can lead this into Checo, but the point is the money that goes into repairing the car, which is obviously something that we saw at Williams in 16 crashes in one season. But Red Bull was at a bit of a disadvantage with bringing in upgrades because Checo kept crashing, and the money that went into repairing his car took away from the development budget. So that is another one of the challenges that, say, McLaren didn't see, because McLaren did not come up with the same amount of damages that Red Bull did. And the same with Ferrari. And Ferrari was actually a lot more reliable than 2023 because there were moments that they couldn't even get the car to the grid. Sorry, sorry, Charles. So that, that definitely really hampered what Red Bull was able to do, and it was really, based on the fact that Max is a savant in the sport and at this, in the car, that he was able to hold on to the championship.
That's fair. I know towards the end, I was really starting to doubt if Max would be able to win still. But like you said, savant, only he could have done it in that car. So good on him.
Yeah.
Okay. But we do have to talk about the anti-savant, unsavant, sans savant, which would
be the other guy,
the other driver of Red Bull, teammate of Max, Checo Perez. So before we get into, his lowlights of 2024, we do need to talk about his contract. So last week, I think we said they determined they were going to have a sit down, little powwow to try and figure out what was going on with his contract, what was going on with his seat going forward. That discussion has happened because they said it was happening Monday post-season, but no news has come out. We have no idea what's happening. It's been rumored that it's going to be an insane buyout. So the last buyout we had was Danny from McLaren for, it was rumored around like 17, 18 million. So Checo's could be anywhere allegedly from 16 million euros to 75 million euros. I personally feel like 75 million euros buyout is way too high.
That's literally what Max made this year. That was Max's driver salary. And Checo's not getting the same salary as Max for many reasons. But yeah.
But so to talk about contracts a little bit, the back piece of it, it's not just driver compensation, but it would also be sponsorship issues because not a lot, but some of Red Bull's sponsors are tied to Red Bull because of Checo. So if Checo is no longer in the seat, it would be a buyout of 75 million maybe, but some would go to sponsors and not all to Checo, because if they were breaking their contract with Checo, who holds these sponsors at the team, they would have to compensate the sponsors for something. So if that is included in the 75 million, totally believable. But if it's not, then this is not real. Like, that can't be a real number.
Yeah, and like another example of, sponsors leaving with drivers would be, Santander left Ferrari and then just signed a very lucrative deal with Williams because it's a Spanish bank and that's where Carlos is.
Right.
So
but the difference there is that their contract was up at Ferrari. So they just didn't re-up. Yeah. So like if they were pulling out completely, like if Santander pulled out completely, they would owe Ferrari money. If Ferrari was like, hey, Carlos isn't here anymore, we don't want you as a sponsor, which they're a global bank. Yes, they're based in Spain, but they are global. Then if it was Ferrari's doing, they would owe them money just based on how contracts work.
Right.
But yeah, so it was up. They are moving to Williams. Makes sense. Carlos is from Spain, Spanish driver. And that's going to be a big chunk of sponsorship money following him to Williams, because Williams is always in need of money.
Yeah.
Always. And so hopefully they can actually develop the car this year instead of, repairing a million crashes. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll talk about Williams in a bit, but yeah, some of the other part of the Checo situation is this isn't just like Helmut Marko and Christian Horner sitting in a room with Checo Perez. Right. This is the Red Bull board of directors that is in on this conversation because of the lucrative sponsorship money that Checo does bring in, which leads to the question, is Checo too expensive to get rid of? And that is something that the board has to decide more than, say, Christian Horner, Helmut Marko.
Right. So I think the interesting piece here to link to that, Kathryn, is that this would not be brought to the board unless Christian and Helmut wanted to get rid of Checo. So, correct. Yes. So I think it's really telling that they're even bringing this to the board to get rid of him and open that seat for someone else. We can have our, tinfoil hat conspiracy theory conversation after this, but they want to get rid of him. He's not performing. And in order to do so, it's too much money. So they have to bring it to the board and say, hey, this is why we want him out. This is his cost to the team. This is how much money he lost us last year for his performance. And, is there a cost benefit there? But also, I would assume if they were smart, they could kind of put feelers out of new drivers and what money would come with the new drivers, so they can say, hey, we're losing X because of Checo, but we're gaining Y because of driver Z. And so it'll kind of even itself out. So also, I could see a driver getting this seat because their sponsor will just pay whatever Checo's buyout was. That's also a possibility. So again, money talks when it comes to getting seats. Just because you're a really talented driver doesn't mean you'll get a seat. If you have money that helps you get places, a la Nicholas Latifi.
Lance Stroll.
Well, that's different. It's his dad.
Other than daddy of the team, yeah.
Completely different. But yeah, so I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I would not be surprised if Checo sticks around, but I think they would try to work in like an addendum or an amendment to his contract for performance. Because if you generally, if you can prove that a firing is performance based, like you're not hitting certain benchmarks, you can get rid of them with a lower buyout or no buyout at all. But that's for other professional sports, but I don't think it would be any different with F1 and how they structure their contracts.
Yeah, exactly. And the other question, speaking of potential other drivers who would be taking the seat right now, that I know Yuki Tsunoda had a test in the Red Bull. He looked good. But who are the sponsors that Liam Lawson is, bringing into the sport? That's the real question here. I don't know what they are.
I don't know. I don't think he has any. I mean, I know he comes from Formula.
He has enough to get him to this level where he is being considered for a Formula One seat. But I just, it's not like, all of the South American, companies that were like banging down the doors to sponsor Franco Colapinto the second he got in the car at Williams. I don't know what those, the sponsorship situation with Liam Lawson is, because the complication with Yuki is, Yuki is a Honda driver that is technically like on loan to Red Bull and VCAR.
Right.
So that's the one of the many complications with Yuki. So it's what is Liam Lawson's sponsorship, and what is also Isaac Hadjar's sponsorship. He just left F2.
That's an interesting one. Yeah.
And he just left his F2 team. So it doesn't look like he's going to be driving another season in F2, which I think he did have another season available to him to do, which either means he's going to drive for VCARB, or if they can't get rid of Checo at Red Bull, he will be the reserve driver for VCARB next year, and then they'll get him in after that.
Yeah, I really think this seat is going to come down to money.
Oh, yeah.
Crazy as it is, because, I mean, Max showed that he can basically carry a team by himself, right? Like, the structure of teams next year is going to be super different than this year, but Max did have a strong season. Max is a savant. He's going to do well regardless. But I think it'll be interesting. I would not be surprised if it is Yuki, just because of the money and because Honda, it's not Honda's team, but they have enough pull to where they can make it happen.
The problem is Honda's leaving.
Is leaving. I know. That's the other problem.
That's where Honda doesn't really have much of a leg to stand on, because they're going to Aston Martin.
True.
So they can't make Helmut keep Yuki like they have when, Honda was the engine supplier for Red Bull.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's going to be super interesting, because if you move Yuki to Red Bull, most likely he's moving to Aston Martin
eventually.
Shortly after, right? As soon as, Daddy Stroll wakes up and kicks Lance off the team.
Mm-hmm.
Or Fernando
Lance is going to retire to become a tennis player.
Or, whatever. Just 20-year-old retiree hanging out on his yacht in the Med. But if Yuki moves to Aston Martin in 2 years, do you want a driver who will stick around longer, like a Liam Lawson or an Isaac Hadjar, or do you want to take the risk with Yuki, have him for 2 years, and then, I don't know. I think it's gonna be interesting. Again, tinfoil hat theories here, but I think it's promising, and I think it's a big jump to even have Yuki testing for Red Bull.
Well, I don't think that they could have gotten away with it, because the media really got this idea into Yuki's head of oh, Yuki should be the next Red Bull driver, which is not exactly fair to Yuki, because we know how Helmut Marko feels about him, implied, allegedly. So they had to, and obviously they had to give him the opportunity, because he's been driving there for 5 years. It feels like this is Yuki's first season, but Yuki's been around quite some time.
Yeah, he's done really well in that car. He outdrove Lawson for the second half of the season, and I don't think that they can just throw Lawson into the Red Bull and just skip over Yuki. Like, I know how Helmet feels, but if they do that, that's just like, I feel like at some point you have to set a precedent for your drivers and like your driving academy. And if they're like, oh yeah, you drive for us on this team, then you get moved up. But watch Yuki sit there for 5 years and not get moved up, and we just like jump him. You know what I mean? I feel like the team has to have some morals. I know they're trying to be competitive, but I feel like there has to be like some moral high ground there.
The problem is also that there's just been this massive logjam that there's too many good drivers in the Red Bull family.
I know.
Which is why Pierre Gasly had to leave to go somewhere else, and where I feel like, Yuki's going to have to leave to go and drive somewhere else in order to find, his team and actually make it his own, other than what he's done so far with the, the Red Bull Junior team, which also we are V-Carb no more, because we are going to be the Racing Bulls next season, which was the rumor that it was going to be this season, and then they just settled on RB for whatever reason. And now the RB, which was just letters, is actually now Racing Bulls, but they will still be the Visa Cash App Racing Bulls. So it will still be V-Carb. I'll probably still call them V-Carb. You'll probably still call them Red Bull Juniors, but their new name is going to be Racing Bulls, which is official.
Okay, Red Bull JV.
Yep.
Well, I think we've soapboxed Checo long enough. 18
the answer
minutes.
is we're still waiting, and we will find out eventually. I said before we started recording, I'm like, wouldn't it be funny if we do this episode, we talk about how there's no news about Checo, and then as soon as we publish the episode, as you're listening to it, Red Bull makes an announcement. We don't think that's actually going to happen, but it would be funny if it did. And I'm just saying that now.
Funny painful, not funny haha. But no,
funny as in, now we have to do another emergency episode.
It's just Checo. He doesn't deserve it.
Depending on what they decide.
Fair.
Because if Checo's retiring, then
yeah,
that's a big deal.
Honestly, I think he just holds out hope for Cadillac, but who knows? I think we'll probably find out like end of January, beginning of February, kind of like Lewis Hamilton timing of last year. Because we're not going to hear anything before Christmas. There's no way they announce anything before the end of the year. And I don't think they're going to hit us with like a January 6th announcement either.
God, I hope not.
Yeah. So
because we are both going to be on vacation.
Yeah, seriously.
Speaking of Cadillac, Ferrari has announced that it will be supplying the team that is totally not Andretti, Cadillac, with power units and gearboxes in a multi-year deal when they come on the grid in 2026 as the 11th Formula One team.
Yes, I think that's super interesting.
It doesn't surprise me.
No, it doesn't surprise me because like Mercedes already has so many people because they're picking up Alpine.
Yeah, they don't have room.
Yeah, but it is interesting. I guess I just thought that maybe they would do their own.
Well, they're going to, because it's going to take so much time to develop a General Motors engine itself. They need someone to supply them with gearboxes and power units when they get into the sport in 2026, with the idea, I believe, the end of the decade, so like 28, 29, 2030, that's when we'll see
that's
Cadillac.
Crazy to think that that's not that far away.
I know. Time is very weird like that. And we're already thinking like the end of the 2020s in Formula One standards.
Like too off track here. But I was kind of surprised that it's going to be Cadillac as the team. Like, where are they finding this money? Like, I haven't seen a Cadillac on the road in forever. And all of the, like, big Cadillac Escalades are from, like, early 2000s that I see with crazy rims.
I saw an Escalade. I was at the UCLA Arizona basketball game in downtown Phoenix yesterday, and I did see an Escalade pulling out of the rich people parking lot. So apparently there are people who are still.
Escalade.
I saw
an
Escalade
for an F1 team.
Apparently, well, As we know, General Motors is an international company with many other different car brands that will be providing the funding for this. But totally not Andretti Cadillac has the money apparently.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay,
and also speaking of the team, Danny Ricciardo has basically said that he's not interested in coming back to Formula One right now, even with
good
Cadillac.
For him.
Yeah, he
good for him.
Like I think he was taking a picture with a fan, and they were like, "Hey, what
he
about
was
Cadillac?"
At the Enchanté pop-up in New York.
Yes, of course. And he basically said, "Nah, not right now." So
yeah, it was like, "No, I'm good."
I'm good. And honestly, good for him. And I think that there are a lot of motorsport series that really want him. I'm sure we'll see him in like IndyCar, NASCAR or something.
Oh,
but
yeah,
I think
for sure.
He's taking a break right now. He's hanging out with Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills. They're busy being besties, and he's going to football games and hanging out in the States and not having to deal with the pressure of trying to perform in the V-Carb. So good for him.
Yeah. I mean, if he said he's like, yes, I want to be in contention, like, that's fine. I love Danny. I love him on the grid. But he just doesn't seem like the driver who's going to like dig in and sacrifice time and effort and blood and sweat and tears to build a brand new team. You know what I mean? I feel like there's two different like that would be a Lewis Hamilton. Like he wants to go into testing and be there all the time and really work with the engineers and XYZ. And
well, it's like Nico Hulkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto going into Audi Sauber. They're digging in now to prepare for 2026 when we have the changeover and Sauber finally goes bye-bye.
Yeah. No, and I don't know. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but his personality just doesn't strike me as like
maybe like not in this time in his career. Like this
earlier on, maybe. Yeah.
This is like we need a driver with some experience, which could have been him, but maybe like could have been him like 3-4 years ago, and then like a young, hungry driver that will probably be an American coming from IndyCar because they really want an American driver with this team. So we'll see about that. But speaking of Sauber, Valtteri Bottas has been making some very interesting comments about the Sauber situation ever since the season ended. That it doesn't surprise me that like he said things or that this is the story, but he basically said that he was convinced to go to Sauber from Mercedes after he was pitched by Fred Vasseur, who was the team principal at the time. He is now the team principal at Ferrari. And he was pitched as like the pillar of the Audi project. But as soon as Vasseur left for Ferrari, that all got thrown out the window, which we've seen from all the personnel changes and the fact that Mattia Binotto is now in charge, that, it was really, he did say that it was a bad move for his career. And it's not wrong in retrospect, but who would have known?
I mean, here's the thing. Valtteri Bottas is not like a rookie in F1. He knows how this goes. He knows that, drivers come and go, team principals come and go, teams come and go. So I think for him to throw his whole weight behind, I'm going to be the pillar of a project that is in 5 years from when I'm joining the team, like, I think that's a little far-fetched. And even saying, like, well, Fred Vasseur was team principal when all this was happening. Are you really relying and counting on a team principal staying that long? Like when we did our team,
not all teams are like Ferrari that go through team principals like toilet paper, like what Ferrari does
constantly. A lot of them flip a lot. I mean, I don't know.
Unless you're Red Bull or Mercedes.
Yeah, I mean, look at Alpine. They get a new one every year.
And Spa.
I just think it's a little, like, I understand what he's doing. I kind of feel like he's pointing the finger at other people, but at the end of the day, it was his decision, and he made it off of facts that, like, I never would have believed to be factual as a complete, uneducated person. But
I don't entirely disagree, but I do think that there is a little bit of like the grand scheme of 4 or 5 years out that we do see pretty regularly in the sport of Formula One. Like even when James Vowles came in to his first season at Williams, it was always like, this is a 5-year project. Carlos Sainz is there for the next, like he's coming in 2025, but he's here as a driver for the next regulation and making Williams a contender in the next regulation. So I can see some legitimacy in like coming in when, you know, Bottas did and being the, you know, the alleged pillar for the Audi project. And then I can also understand that it was a gamble that didn't work out. Danny Ricciardo gambled going to Renault and McLaren from Red Bull, and we all know how that turned out. And Bottas will probably be Mercedes reserve driver anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, it's 100% the gamble that Carlos is making with Williams too, because
that is true.
Like, I mean, I know James came into Williams saying, like, you got to give us some time to build because, like, we're not going to be great overnight. But he's had 2 consecutive seasons where they've had to, you know, I don't know, like, not develop the cars because their drivers are crashing. Now, that's not necessarily all up to James. And I know his first year going in, that wasn't his car.
Right.
But he may not get his 5 years that he's looking for as a team principal. Like, if he can't deliver on some performance metrics that, because the Williams board, whoever makes these decisions, is not going to say like, oh, well, we didn't win constructors, so you're fired. Like, that's a dumb metric. But I'm sure there has to be certain performance metrics that if he's not meeting as team principal, he'll be gone. And he may not make it 5 years. And then Carlos's gamble will kind of be like Bottas's gamble. So I don't know. It's just interesting.
But the other question of that is if, you know, if in the unfortunate event that our favorite team principal gets replaced, then who is he being replaced by? And is that somebody who can take the current situation forward? Or does he want to like clear the slate, like say Flavio Briatore at Alpine, who's just like clearing house to recreate Alpine in his vision, which we'll see about that. But I think that it's gonna be really interesting to see how all of this plays out, especially once we get into the actual 2025 season and we start seeing performances. And James Vowles has even said, you know, specifically to Williams, they're going to sacrifice 2025 in favor of developing the car for 2026 in the new regulation, which is it's exactly what Haas did.
And I think the thing that James Vowles has on his side is, one, he's come out and said it point blank a million times till he's blue in the face that they are sacrificing this next season so that they can focus on 2026. I also think it's super helpful that he has Toto backing him and in his corner. Like, he's from the Toto school of F1, and Toto thinks really highly of him. And Toto, I don't want to say Williams is like a puppet for Mercedes, but Williams
is the sister team.
Is the sister team, exactly. So I think if Toto believes in James and understands his vision as a team principal, I think that James will keep that, at least to try and finish out his vision.
Yeah, so we'll see about that. Obviously, they had a really tough year, especially in the second car, and Alex Albon can really only do so much. But to wrap up other news, Gabriel Bortoleto, who is coming in to join Formula One next year, he did end up winning the F2 title, and he also won the FIA Rookie of the Year en route to his Sauber debut this season. And I was looking at like the most recent Rookies of the Year over the last like 8 years, like somebody threw up a graphic, and of those Rookies of the Year, all of them but one have like made it into Formula One and have had like halfway decent careers in Formula One. So that's a good sign for Bortoleto. Isaac Hadjar finished P2, a few points behind, and then Paul Aaron is finished in P3. He will be the new Alpine reserve driver in 2025, replacing Jack Doohan, who is in the seat already because of the whole, you know, Esteban Ocon drama.
The drums with Esty Bestie.
Little bit of drums there.
Well, now that we're a half hour in, do you want to start recapping the 2024 season?
Yes! Oh my goodness. This is how we go with things. I think we went off track in about 14 different directions in this first half hour. But anyway.
But what do you expect besides that?
That's what the show is all about. But yeah, let's talk. So I pulled up our 2024 season predictions from when we did them, end of February, early March, a million years ago in Formula One terms. And so we're going to go through what we predicted and what they turned out to be. And we'll see how we did. You actually did really
super close.
You got close on one of them. So and then we'll talk about our actual in-season race predictions. I did the math.
Yes.
And so we'll see what the final points tally was.
Okay, so with that said, let's get to our predictions for the 2024 season. So, in our prediction episode, we picked the top 3 drivers, which, as we all know now, it ended up being Max, Lando, Charles. And I got very, very close. So I said it was going to be Max, Lando, Carlos. So I did pick a Ferrari driver for the last one there. Unfortunately, it was Charles. And then you had Max, Carlos, Checo.
Yeah, Checo went from P2 in the championship last year to P8, 9, 10, 20, 30 in the championship this year. So that was clearly, and there's been all these lowest finish for a champion's teammate. Where did he finish? He finished P8. So, lowest finish for a champion's teammate since Jos Verstappen in the 90s to Michael Schumacher, because of course everything is related to the Verstappens and the Schumachers in the sport. And if you added up the margins between every other teammate, it would be less points than the margin between Max and Checo. I think is something ridiculous like that I think Adam sent me. So thank you, Adam, for that. And it's just, that was we know that Checo has these strong starts and a performance dip, and he just never came out of that performance dip this season, at all.
No, not at all. He dug himself into a hole and just stayed there.
Yeah, never left the hole.
So next we did top 3 constructors, and I would like to applaud both of us for getting all 3 teams correct, just not
the wrong
right order. Again, coming off of 2023, expecting Red Bull to be super dominant. Again, we both picked Red Bull as our P1. As we all know, again, McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull rounded out the top 3 for constructors. So Kathryn, you had Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, and then I had Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren. So I got Ferrari right, but
if I moved Red Bull from first to third, I'd be correct. Just scoot everyone over. And it was one of the closest margins between first and second in decades. Because obviously last year it was Red Bull that had 8,000 points, and then P2 was 300 points back. So the margins were very small. And if you look at how close the margins were, but Ferrari is kicking themselves for little bits of losing points here and there, and poor performances that really came back to bit them in the backside, and a lot of stuff that you don't see until you look back in retrospect and you're here's exactly where we missed 14 points instead of here's exactly where we missed 200 points.
Right. Exactly. And honestly, I don't know which one would be better. Woulda, coulda, shoulda, or we tried our best. You know what I mean?
We did what we could,
I think it's bad either way, but yeah.
But it's also totally indicative of that's so Ferrari. And now Ferrari's on this high of next year's totally our year, you guys, which Ferrari has been saying since the last time they won a championship with Kimi Räikkönen. So it's been a minute since next year was actually their year.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
So next we had the biggest good surprise team. We both picked VCARB. We thought VCARB was just going to be so great this year with Yuki and Danny.
They were not.
Ended up being Yuki and Sargent, or not Sargent, Yuki and Lawson towards the end of the season. But I would say they were not a great team. Kathryn, you said that Alpine was the good surprise. And as much as I don't like talking about them, I think that's very fair, because after race 2, we were Alpine's not going to get a point all season.
Right.
So they did struggle a little bit at the beginning, but they definitely, came around. They got some podiums, which was
no one saw coming.
Did not see coming at all. So yeah, good on Alpine.
Yeah, I mean, the way that they, obviously the Sao Paulo podiums shot them up from the actual basement of the constructor standings to many, many millions of dollars, euros in prize money to end up finishing in P6 and holding off Haas, who also, I would say Haas had an impressive season as well. So both of them, I think, were very good surprises, especially considering how inconsistent Haas was. And, for all that Alpine was so terrible and so easy to forget that they exist, they were very consistent in how they were able to improve as the season went on.
Yeah, I think Alpine definitely like you said, started in the basement and then really shot up. And I feel like Haas just steadily stayed there. Like Haas got the sneaky points because Alpine they had two people on the podium in Sao Paulo, right? So that obviously shot them up, got them a ton of points. Where those two podium finishes, it was going to take Haas so much to make up for that and get the
Right.
equivalent points. But I think Haas really surprised us because we thought they were going to be terrible getting a new team principal. I'm pretty sure we picked them to be very, very low. And I mean, they weren't in the running for top three, but they got those sneaky points. Hulk did great in qualifying, which really helped him on Sundays. And K Mags was the human wrecking ball. So, just
Right.
helping out his teammate.
Yeah,
But
he and it really goes to show you what playing the teammate game can do in these lower these under the midfield teams, like the back of the grid is, you could, if you can pick a stronger driver and have your teammate drive in support of them, then that can be really positive, just as having someone like the Valtteri Bottas Lewis Hamilton relationship at Mercedes,
yeah,
where Bottas did a lot of holding off other people so Lewis could go off into the sunset, and you see that at both ends of the
right.
championship spectrum.
Yeah. So keeping on a positive, we did the biggest surprise for a driver.
Good surprise.
Good surprise. So Kathryn and I had really high hopes.
We were so optimistic.
Kathryn picked Zhou Guan Yu, and I picked Logan Sargent. So
we all know how those two drivers' seasons went, though. Zhou did have a good surprise in Qatar. He scored points finally. Sauber did not have a pointless season, but there was really nothing going for either of those drivers all year long. And then obviously Logan Sargent got replaced by one of our biggest surprises that started off good in Franco Colapinto.
Yeah, I think so. For this, honestly, I think my biggest surprise, I'm gonna say two. One is like kind of like in line with it, and then another might be a softball, but I would say Ollie Behrman. Like Ollie Behrman was a great surprise. Stepping in to take over for Carlos when he had to get his appendix out, and then again going in for K-Mags and racing and getting points in both of his races. Like, was not expecting that. Like maybe the car really helped him in Ferrari, right? But then when to do it in a Haas car as well, I think that really goes to show how good of a driver he is. So I definitely think Ollie Behrman was my biggest surprise, even though he only had 2 races. And then I would say my second driver would be Lando, which maybe it's a softball, but he'd come into this season never having won a race. He won multiple races this year. He really, I think, got into his stride and really, really fought with Max. I know Max ended up winning by several points or by a lot, but he's still at least
many severals.
But he still like at least made it exciting for a little bit to where it's like, oh, he needs this many points. Max has to be here and he has to be here for the next few weekends. I really think that it was a good surprise. And I think this is where we expected Lando to be like last season. You know what I mean?
Yeah, kind of. And because this was our first actual like real title fight for the championship since 2021 between Max and Lewis. And like, yes, there was a little bit of back and forth between Max and Charles in like early 2022 before Max just kind of said bye, and the Ferrari went on to be a little bit unreliable that season. But yeah, so we had a real, whether or not McLaren was actually going for the Drivers' Championship, which changed week to week depending on how well Max did in each race, Lando was very impressive, and then personality-wise got less and less unlikable. But, this was really where he kind of proved that this is why McLaren wanted to lock him down for a long-term contract and not risk getting him poached by Mercedes, which was part of those, if you remember from back in February, those early season dominoes were Charles Leclerc's extension with Ferrari and Lando Norris's extension with McLaren to lock them down en route to Lewis Hamilton announcing that he would be moving teams. And so that Ferrari gets their two guys locked up, and then Mercedes has to go hunting for a second driver.
Yeah. Oh, the dominoes.
That feels like
how they
so
fall.
many years ago.
I know, it does. Okay. And then let's go into our kind of like, well, no, let's finish on one positive. So the best race overall.
Yes.
Kathryn, you said it was going to be Vegas. I said Brazil because I love Brazil. And I would say Brazil was probably the best race.
I would agree. Vegas was it was a decent race, and obviously it,
Right.
ending with the championship was a good thing that made it, also made it exciting. And also, George won. They led to some, intrigue in the Ferrari McLaren battle, but Sao Paulo, far and ahead, best race of the season.
Oh, so good. So good. Okay, so now we go downhill. So now let's get into like our bad. So the biggest disappointment for a team, I mean, there's several you could pick from. I think obviously Sauber is the bottom of the bottom for me. Just they didn't get a point. They really
got
struggled.
4 points.
Well, okay. They didn't get a point until the second to last race of this season. Really struggled. Neither driver did very well. Williams, they had a ton of crashes. They just could not develop because of the damage. And I think that's the difference for me between Sauber and Williams. Like Sauber didn't have a ton of damage where they were having to, rework their development because they were paying for repairs, whereas Williams did. And then also, I like to call Alpine the most anonymous team on the grid because we just never talk about them and we forget about them. But I don't think we've talked about Aston Martin once this season.
And that's why I put them on this list of biggest disappointment, is because I really do think that, like, from an obviously you and I had high expectations for Williams, for V-Carb going into this season that did not, come about. But also Aston Martin was nowhere to be found at all. Fernando Alonso was nursing an injury that he got in Sao Paulo all the way through the end of the season, which had come out right after Abu Dhabi. But they really just could not do anything in order to help themselves, and they were just trapped in no man's land in P5 in the Constructors Championship because they weren't going to beat Mercedes, but they weren't going to get beaten in they weren't going to get drawn into the battle for P6, but they were really just so nowhere because Fernando did what he could, and Lance Stroll exists as a driver on the team. So I think I really do think, the longer that I think about it, like, yes, Sauber is disappointing. Yes, Williams couldn't, fight their way out of a paper bag. But I really do think that my biggest disappointment this season is Aston Martin.
That's fair. I think just because we had such high expectations for them. But I can't get past Sauber. Like, they didn't even improve. Like, they just cemented themselves at the bottom. Like, it seems like, and maybe this is not fair to say, but it feels like they've just completely given up and they're only there because they're going to be Audi soon. You know what I mean?
I think that some of it is they got started on the back foot. The things that they fixed were not the things that they fixed were all like intangibles, like making sure that their pit stops weren't 52 seconds long. Like, and they really, did we forget about the Bahrain pit stops? Yeah. So they were able to develop in bits, but then they really just couldn't get themselves out of Q1, and they had no pace anywhere, really. And I do think that they probably had some issues with upgrades that ended up being downgrades in the grand scheme of things. But they and Aston Martin are really like the big highlights, because obviously for Williams, like, Logan kept crashing. Logan got replaced by a guy who started out really strong, and then he started crashing. And then and also by the time that they got to Colapinto, they were also still on such a back foot development rise because of Sargent's crashes that also didn't help Colapinto's crashes and Alex Albon's crashes. So it all just, the three of those teams are really kind of the ones that were really the biggest struggle buses of the season.
Yeah. So, and just for context, you had picked Mercedes and I picked Ferrari. Mostly because of their strategy. But
And I mean, to be fair, Mercedes also had some significant issues this season, more so on Lewis Hamilton's side of the garage, which is that a question of, is it the car, or is it that 2021 fundamentally changed Lewis Hamilton as a driver? As I have said many, many times, we don't really know, and we'll see when Kimi Antonelli gets into the car next year. But Mercedes also, to their standards, P4 is an underperformance, and Ferrari was just a really pleasant surprise that they had moments where the strategy was bad, but it didn't hamper them from a P2 finish in the championship, but did hamper them from a P1 finish.
Right. And I mean, again, I think the Tifosi would say they're a disappointment because they didn't win.
Oh, of course.
But in the grand scheme of things, I think they had a pretty good season compared to prior years. So
I mean, yeah, we could say that.
Yeah. I mean, they were like within one race of winning. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like they weren't there last year.
Yeah,
so.
if there was a race after Abu Dhabi, and McLaren didn't clinch then, which if there was a race after Abu Dhabi, then McLaren couldn't have clinched in Abu Dhabi, then they might have been able to
yeah,
pull
they
it
needed
out.
like one more race.
Yeah. It's like they needed just like 5 more laps.
Exactly. Not even a full race. One more sprint. Just give us another sprint.
Right.
Or something.
Now.
Okay, so now going into disappointment for the driver's side, you picked both Alpine drivers, which first half of the season I would agree with you.
Right.
And then I said Charles Leclerc, which I would argue that I picked correctly because he was a disappointment and he only got third. So not good enough. I also just hold Charles to a very high standard because I like Carlos so much more than him. So
I mean,
anyways.
that is true, and I think that the Tifosi would agree with you that Charles did disappoint because he couldn't get P2. He missed out on P2 last year as well against Checo. Yeah. So this is the second year in a row that he's lost the P2 battle. P3 is pretty good though.
Yeah. But I think it's pretty unanimous here on who is the biggest disappointment.
Yes, and it's Checo.
It is Checo. We only spent, 20 minutes talking about him at the top of the podcast. But yeah, I mean, for him to be in the car he was in and finish so far down is so unacceptable. Him and Max had the same car, virtually the same car, on the same team. Max won, and he was so far behind. I just think that's a huge disappointment. Because, we can say Zhou Guanyu and Valtteri Bottas were disappointments, but they both consistently finished at the bottom. So,
which is not where Checo should be finishing.
Right, exactly. So when you don't have a car that can even get you to Q2, it's hard for me to say you're a disappointment as a driver when your car sucks. That's just my
Yeah, and I think also an argument could be made a little bit for Lewis having a little bit of a disappointing season. I think Lewis would also say that his season was a little disappointing. And this is not just because I don't like Lewis as a driver. I do think that Lewis really struggled with the car this year, and he had a much closer battle with George than the 7-time world champion should have, and he was just so frustrated, and there were all those rumors of he's just gonna leave after Sao Paulo and just wait to go to Ferrari in February. But it's been a difficult time for Lewis, especially, even just this entire regulation has been difficult in the Mercedes for Lewis. It really hasn't been good for him. It kind of is it's exciting that he's, going to have, new dreams at Ferrari that will, crush his life because that's where champions go to die. But it's been not what Lewis should, with the standard that he is, should still be competing for the top 3, 4, 5 drivers instead of.
I understand what you're saying, but to kind of play devil's advocate a bit, can we really say he's a disappointment or the car was a disappointment? Because him and George finished virtually identical points wise. Whereas for Red Bull, Max wins and Checo's at the bottom. You know what I mean? That gap to me just screams disappointment from one of the drivers. And if Lewis is, granted, Lewis didn't have the best season, but I personally blame the car more than the driver just because of where him and George ended up shaking out. Like if George
Yeah.
if George was way, way ahead of him and he was way, way down, obviously, yes, that would be a disappointing season for him. But I think it's more of a disappointment with the car than the driver.
Yeah, it's another car that Lewis just wants to chuck into the dumpster, but now he's chunking it into the dumpster and going to a shiny new red car in Ferrari. And also, Lando made a comment after Abu Dhabi of like, there's so much hype about Lewis. It was like he's retiring. He's not leaving the sport. He's just going to another
He'll be
team.
back next year.
Calm down. He's not leaving, which I just thought was really funny. And yeah, so we'll see if the Ferrari will suit Lewis better than the way the Mercedes has, and it wouldn't surprise me if it does.
Yeah, I don't know. But no, I mean, I understood why he got special treatment and stuff, but like Lando was so right. Like he's back on the grid next year. Like
yeah, it's like
it is like a separation of, two iconic pairings. Like I've said previously, like I equate him and Mercedes to like Tom Brady and the Patriots. You know what I mean? So it is the end of an era.
But it's also like, remember that we have many other drivers on the grid who are actually leaving Formula One, and Lewis is the one that gets the whole big deal,
But it's because
donuts
it's
on the main street. Right. It is because it's Lewis, and it's not like you're going to do that for like Zhou Guan Yu, who did get his donuts on the back straight after Abu Dhabi. But yeah, so it's been a little rough for Lewis, and I'm sure Lewis's fans are only hoping that things will get better going to Ferrari in the red pajamas.
Yes. Okay, to end our downhill slide real quick, worst race. And I'm going to blame this on the fact that we did not have this race in 2023 because it wasn't in my mind on how much this race sucked. I definitely think it's Imola. Imola was so boring. Nothing happened. Can't pass. Like, it's so horrible. You had Saudi Arabia. I had Austria, which I think both of them were pretty decent. Saudi Arabia was, not to like feed into something we're going to talk about in a little bit, but Saudi Arabia is where we had Ollie Behrman's debut. So that was kind of exciting. But I think for sure, Imola, no question, worst race.
When I was putting this together and I was thinking about races that stood out in good ways and bad ways, like I get it, they can't all be bangers, but when it stood out of like a race that I was just like, this is not exciting, I have to go with Imola. And the ones that, like, obviously I'm going to pick Saudi Arabia because it's not my favorite race. And even, Austria, sometimes Austria is good. Sometimes Austria is really bad because track limits. Right. And we were fortunate that those races were good. And then before we go into our 5 races to relive, we have to have our final totals for our race predictions points, where you and we picked pole, podium, and P10 and gave points to them. We got 5 points for getting the podium, 3 points for picking P10, and 1 point for picking pole. I got very lucky and I got a sweep in Saudi Arabia. I got one weekend. And so the final tally for predictions, which actually got pretty close because you picked up 2 points in, where did you pick those up? In Kota, you picked up 2 points, and going into the last stretch of the season from like Singapore on, I only got 1 point and you picked up 3 after that stretch. So it ended up being I won the 2024 predictions championship, but you were not that far behind. I won 29-20, which is Saudi Arabia literally was the difference.
Yeah, it was. So you got one lucky weekend and that's all it was.
Yeah.
But still, that's really sad.
We only picked up.
We only got 20 and 29 points.
Yeah.
So basically, we're terrible at this.
We're really bad at picking things.
2025 will be our year. I think it's because we do it with so much bias. You know what I mean? Like, even if we say we don't, we do it with bias. Like, you would never put Lewis Hamilton on a podium.
And I was right not to.
He won a race. What are you talking about?
But I still right not to. No, it's all part of the fun. But yeah, we left so many points on the table. Like, I didn't even think to pick out how many points were available versus how many points we did get.
Way more than 20 and 29 points.
So many. But yeah, it really was. I got lucky with the Saudi Arabia sweep, and it just went downhill from there.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to 2025. I'm very excited.
Yes.
I will do better than 20 points. Okay, so before we wrap up, nope, there's 2 more segments. So
yeah.
Second to last, before we end an hour into this, apologies to all. Super quickly, let's just recap 5 races to relive. So if you have lived under a rock and you did not watch the full season, or you didn't watch any races, or you're just getting into F1, or just getting into our podcast, these are 5 races that Kathryn and I think you absolutely have to watch, or just they are notable because something exciting happened. So
yeah,
to start from the beginning, I kind of spoiled this, but Saudi Arabia, which we all know Kathryn doesn't like, but
shocking.
Shocking. This was a big one for us because it was Ollie Behrman's F1 debut with Ferrari.
And he scored points.
And he got in the points. This was all because Carlos lost his appendix. Or didn't lose it. He had to have it removed. It didn't go running away. It was removed. And this was super exciting to see, you know, a rookie in the car do well. So that was a good one to start off with.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of like we should have known that it was going to foreshadow some wild things happening this season, because not only you think Ollie Behrman coming in the car as a super sub once is one thing, but he super sub 3 times in the season. So because K-Max got sick, remember?
Oh, that's right. He had
race
3
ban
races.
And he got sick. Yeah,
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So then our second one is the race after Saudi Arabia, which is Australia, which was not a great race for Max. And it was also Carlos Sainz's epic return after getting his appendix out and winning the race. So that was a race that nobody saw coming.
No, did not see him doing that well. I mean, he was like hobbling out of the car.
He could barely move, right?
Wild.
Yeah. So tune into that one.
Definitely a good one. Yeah. And then hate on this all you want, folks, but we can't, you know, go on without including Monaco. 1, because it's Monaco, and 2, because Charles finally broke the Monaco curse. He won in his home race, which is super exciting. Was it the most entertaining race? No, but Charles won. So
I would say watch it if you love Charles, but also watch it for the podium and Prince Albert of Monaco's reaction to Charles winning the race is one of the, I think, especially with Charles being a Monegasque driver and, you know, finally winning his home race and finally breaking the curse, and the way that everybody in like the royal family reacted to that is really one of the reasons why that was a really special race, even though Monaco, they all can't be bangers, and with the first lap crash, it was just a total hot mess of a parade race for an hour. But it is worth tuning in at least to see the end of it, and for Charles and for the royal family.
And to see the human barrier, because they don't actually have fences. They just all hold hands. And they don't let people through.
So the marshals, it's instead of when the winning drivers get out of the car and they go to like celebrate with their mechanics and everything, usually there's just like little fences, but they don't have fences, they have marshals in Monaco. And so you have all of these like really happy drivers
just
and
linking
mechanics
arms.
and like celebrating between these guys that are just linking arms together wearing their marshals gear. It's hilarious. Highly recommend.
It is. It's so good. I'll let you talk about the next race.
Of course you're going to make me talk about the next race. So the next race is Silverstone. This was, you know, Lewis hadn't won a race in a while. He finally wins a home race. It's at Silverstone. It's with Mercedes. It's one of those like real, like if you're going to leave your team after 100 years being with your team, you might as well win your home race. And to be successful at Silverstone, which is an iconic race, iconic track, it was great for Lewis to have that accomplishment.
Yes, I think it was really good for him, for the team, for Toto to have that moment this year. So I'm really happy that they were able to. And last but not least, what we are calling the best race of the season, Sao Paulo. Holy rain, holy chaos. So good.
It was a good regular race. It was a good sprint race. Shocking, as you know from us. It was also one of the best wet weather performances from a Formula One driver, period, in Max Verstappen's performance. It was also, let's be real, the performance that sealed the Drivers' Championship for Max. Obviously, he didn't clinch it until Vegas, but he would have been in a very different situation had he not been as dominant in that race, especially with everything that had gone on in the US and in Mexico beforehand. So that was really solid for them. And then, of course, the Alpine double podium that no one saw coming in Sao Paulo. So there's just so many things about that race that it's the race of the year and definitely one of the top 5 races to relive.
Yeah, for sure.
And I will also say honorable mention to Lando's win in Miami that also nobody saw coming and was a foreshadowing of we did not realize that this was going to happen and that that McLaren was going to go on the tear that McLaren did this season.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, okay. So last but not least, this is way too early to even know, but what moments do you think, I don't know if it's like, do you think will be on Drive to Survive, or do you want to see on Drive to Survive? Because
Right.
I know we did both of them last year, but I guess at this point, just recapping, like, what do you expect to see and you'd be happy to see, or what is something that you want to see, whichever avenue you want to pick?
Right.
What are like your top three moments?
So my top 3 in no particular order is and this is less so what I expect to see, but more I'm very curious to see how they're going to handle it, because I do think that compared to last year, where I think we were a little off in our predictions, I think that these are three things that we will see. That's kind of how I attacked it this year. But first of all, I wonder how they're going to handle the preseason Christian Horner situations, because
I didn't even think about that.
And I do think that Netflix has spent time with Christian Horner and with Red Bull as the season has gone on. Obviously, Christian Horner did not do team principal radio stuff with Sky this year, where one of the team principals that every week that they pick a different one. So obviously, he didn't do that this season, but they did. I do believe Netflix has been embedded with Red Bull and Christian Horner as TV man whore. That's totally his thing. So I'm very curious to see how they're going to handle that. And I am also very curious to see, because they're gonna spend way too much time on Alpine again, because they did that. They gave Alpine 2 episodes last year, and we're still not over how dumb that was. But I'm really curious to see how they're going to handle Flavio Briatore coming back to Formula One and coming back to Alpine. So I think that they're going to spend a lot of time on that, and on Briatore cleaning house and firing Bruno Famin at Spa, like Otmar Safnauer did the year before. So I think that will be really interesting. And then I also think it's going to be really interesting, as we've talked about, like Lewis Hamilton and how they're going to tackle Lewis Hamilton's, Mercedes swan song, and then the preparate, how are they going to transition, kind of like Lewis Hamilton, where he went from wearing white to wearing red throughout the Abu Dhabi weekend. How is Netflix going to handle him making the transition from Mercedes to Ferrari, and how are they going to handle the announcement, because they missed the announcement because they had already wrapped filming and wrapped editing when Lewis the announcement that he was going to Ferrari, and that was not featured in season 6 of Drive to Survive, and will definitely be a highlight of season 7.
Yeah, I can't decide if it's going to be the first episode or like a grand finale last episode, but I think Lewis, not like Mercedes, but Lewis will get his own episode.
Oh yeah,
it'll be a full thing. But no, that's like my number one, is I want to know, I want, not to quote Bravo, but like I want receipts, I want timelines, like I want to see the whole thing of how it started, who talked to who first. I want to see him and Toto talking. Like I want to see the whole thing.
Right.
I don't know if we'll be able to see that, but we might get background like from Fred and from Toto and from Lewis on that.
And
so
Carlos.
Okay, going into point number 2, I really want to see Carlos's reaction in like interview. I know we've seen it a little bit, and he's like, I understand it's Lewis, whatever.
Duh.
Which I do, but I want to see Carlos's reaction, and then I also want to see, I hope Carlos gets a whole episode. I want to see his whole courting process from every single team. I want to know how he ended up at Williams. I want to know how he didn't end up at a better team. I really want to see that whole thing. I'd love to hear from his father as well. But my third point, and I don't know how much we'll see or hear about it, but I really would like to understand like the perspective from team principals and drivers on the F1 movie and like how that's been with filming behind the scenes, like in season for the movie. Like I don't know if they'll have any crossover. I'm sure we'll like, I don't know how it works, like filming with Netflix versus filming with a different production company.
Right.
Maybe we'll see Brad Pitt in some of these, maybe we won't, but I think it would be an interesting perspective to see some of that throughout
I hope they do a like behind the scenes documentary of the filming of the movie, especially because the writer's strike and the actor's strike in 2023 really threw off the filming schedule because they were supposed to film heavily in the last like third of the season, and they really weren't able to do that, and that's part of the reason why they filmed so much in this season, including almost every race down the stretch. And then of course we saw all of the filming that they did in Abu Dhabi. So it'll be really interesting to see if it's like, oh hey, there's Brad Pitt over there, or if this is going to be like at Silverstone in 2023 when they did the national anthem and Brad Pitt and his co-stars, whose name is escaping me right now, they were there with the other drivers for the anthem, but this like all of the TV cameras were told don't include them in the anthem.
Right.
And it's like kind of like you had to be there in order to see it, or the people who were allowed to do like those special, YouTube videos about the film that came out on social media after the trailer came out. So I really do think that like Netflix is going to be told don't touch the F1 movie and don't film anything. But I really do want to see like a behind the scenes documentary of the movie. And I hope they do, kind of like how they did like a behind the scenes documentary of Wicked. When Wicked came out, Peacock released a like an hour 45-minute long documentary. I hope that they do something similar for the F1 movie when it comes out next year, because I really want to know, like, Lewis Hamilton, like they've talked, he's one of the producers, and they've talked about how he's gone in the like behind the scenes and has told like the director, like, this was wrong here, and they've gone in and fixed it, and they're like, this is a very expensive movie because like Lewis has all of these corrections. So I'm really curious to see what behind the scenes of this movie is going to be like.
Yeah. And just super quickly before we get to our last point, I think it's good that Lewis is a producer on the movie, just because all of those little details, like that, because we've all, hopefully you guys are watching all these interviews like Kathryn and I are, but the nitpickiness of Lewis, I think, will help the true fans enjoy the movie, because some of these things that they would let go or just ignore, I think he's catching them and highlighting certain things that are important, like to stay true to F1. So
right, like there are things that you and I are going to see that are going to jump out at us, and then there's things that we're going to miss because we haven't grown up listening to Formula One engine since we were 3 years old. And so which is reminding me of a comment that from the person who got me into Formula One that I'm not going to bring up. But anyway, it's gonna be to a benefit to like the diehards who are like really in on to do things like digitally replace F1 driving footage with these drivers. And I think like technology is, up to snuff to the point where it's gonna look okay. Like we saw in the trailer where Brad Pitt is literally like superimposed onto Pierre Gasly in Spa. So I think that it should, like, the driving and the motorsport stuff should be good. It's the plot of the movie or lack thereof that I think that we're really concerned about.
Yeah.
Right. So hopefully we get a new trailer soon. We probably won't get one until like, I don't know, March, April, May, but I'm really curious to see how it's going to go.
Yeah. Okay, so before we leave, sorry, it's been such a long episode, but everything is super noteworthy and needed to be in this episode. So our way too early prediction, we'll do a whole 2025 prediction episode in a few months. However, after this season, what is your like too early prediction for 2025?
My too early prediction for 2025 is I think that Max will win another championship next year. But
Of course, Kathryn.
But I do think that Red Bull's going to have the opportunity to take advantage of the fact that with finishing P3, they are going to get more wind tunnel time than McLaren and Ferrari. So that will help them. I also think that it's going to be a closer battle than ever up at the front constructors wise, and also on the driver standing standpoint. And then also, we didn't really talk about this, but Adrian Newey will be at Aston Martin in 2025. He might not have a lot of input on the 2025 car to start, but it should lead to a stronger second half from Aston Martin if they know what's good for them.
That's gonna be such an interesting change. We have so much going on in the next few years. Like, I thought this was the best season I've watched live so far.
Next
I can't
year
wait for
will
2025
also...
and 2026. Like,
yeah, and I also really quickly just think that it's going to be more competitive across the board, and we're going to have so many new drivers and so many drivers on different teams that going from last year to 2023 to 2024, where we had everybody stayed and we had the same driver lineup, now we have a completely different set of drivers everywhere. We still don't even know technically what the last two seats are going to be. And so I think that that is also going to lead to a lot of changes in what the Constructors' Championship is going to look like.
Yeah. So kind of piggybacking off of that, my too early prediction, I think we're going to see some big things from rookies this year.
Mm-hmm.
So we have several rookies on the grid this year. Last year we had none. Historically, rookies have not been amazing, but I think we're going to see some big things from them. Which ones, too early to tell, but just in general, I think they're going to do really well. Also, I think we're going to get something big out of Ferrari. Either like a big disaster or a big success. Like, I don't think they're going to have a middle ground. It's either going to be like
really
top,
good
top, or bottom. I think they have two amazing drivers who are equally as capable to win Drivers' Championship. Obviously, Lewis has already done it. Charles, I think, could get there. But I think their downfall is going to be like team orders and strategy and like how they shake out with their drivers. When you have two amazing drivers like that, I don't think like it works. But
we've already seen this season with them basically not having their stories straight for Charles and Carlos, right, and like not having a plan in place. Vegas specifically comes to mind with how things went there. So the real question is are they going to know what to do with themselves if Lewis and Charles are both doing well? And I don't know if Ferrari's capable of knowing that.
Right. And it's been obvious for the last two seasons, Charles is their golden boy, right? He's been part of the project and he has been their pillar for so many years. Now you have Lewis Hamilton, seven-time world champion coming on. It's not like he's like, oh, hey, I'm towards the end of my career. Like Charles is, the golden boy and I'm just going to sit back here.
No, he's going to win another championship.
Ferrari to win. Yeah, he's going to Ferrari to win. So I think it's just going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out, especially because, Charles, to me, just not to the extent of George, but he is kind of like a whiny little baby, and I feel like it's just going to be chaos between them, but we shall see.
I want to look at this optimistically for the sake of like the Tifosi, but I just don't know how well this is going to go for Ferrari, and I think that I understand Ferrari wanting to lock up Charles Leclerc, especially with the hopes of Lewis Hamilton coming in. But I don't know how that partnership is going to work out because Charles Leclerc is not going to be happy like Valtteri Bottas to play second fiddle to Lewis Hamilton. And Ferrari's going to have to put Lewis first no matter what they say.
I don't know. It'll just be interesting.
Really big question marks there. So this could be Ferrari's year or it's going to be Ferrari tears.
Yeah. All right, well, up next, TBD. Welcome to the story of this podcast. We're heading into the holiday season. Kathryn and I are both taking a much-needed break, so we may or may not have an episode coming out next week. If not, we will be coming back to the podcast in January, but just stay tuned. Follow us on our socials. We'll update when we have a new episode coming out. I think we'll have one out next week.
Yeah.
I'm feeling pretty confident.
Yeah.
But then we will
I
be taking Christmas off. We will be taking Christmas off. We will be taking New Year's off.
Yeah, which is basically over New Year's.
And
our calendar is weird.
Yeah. Time. And honestly, I'm still like reintegrating into US holidays because I haven't celebrated US holidays in like 3 years. And all of a sudden, no one was at work. I'm like, why is no one here? And they're like, oh, it's Veterans Day. And I'm like, oh,
what's that?
I forgot about that. Anyways, back on track. We will have an episode coming out next week. And then most likely the next one will be coming out like mid-ish January.
Something like that.
After all of the holiday seasons are done being celebrated.
Yeah. There may be a chance that we might have some short episodes coming out, not during the holidays, but we might do some like short bits of like, if there's a big news, we'll react to that. But we probably won't give you a 80-minute episode until probably when we're reacting to Drive to Survive again, because I think that's one of the other than some of our longer reaction episodes for races. But thank you for bearing with us.
Honestly, I would love to say like, we could edit this down, but there's nothing to edit out. We're just, everything needed to be talked about.
Yeah.
So it was a good season.
It was.
I mean,
it's worthy of an hour and
like,
20 minutes.
Right. It's better than the flip side of being like, well, that was the season. Max won everything and Red Bull ran away with it. Let's move on to 2024.
I mean, our 2023 season reaction is literally a dramatic reading of every record that Max Verstappen broke in the F1 record book. Like that's all we had to talk about other than Carlos winning in Singapore.
Oh my gosh. Honestly though. Yeah.
But this has been 2024. Well,
this has been our 2024 season reaction episode. Thanks for going off track with us, guys.